President, I find it unfortunate that the addition of two words is somehow unacceptable to the members of this body. Two words. Two words which, by the way, would put Utah in the same category as Alaska and Wyoming. What do those states have in common? Well, they've both repeatedly been victims of the Antiquities Act. You see, in every single state, Colorado and west of Colorado, the federal government owns at least 15% of the land. In many of those states, it's much more than 15% of the land. In my state, it's 2/3 of the land, about 67%. What that means is that we have to get permission from the federal government to do just about everything. And what that also means is that our schools are underfunded, everything from fire, search, rescue, education, local governance. All these budgets are underfunded as a result of the fact that most of the land is owned by the federal government. We can't tax that land. We receive pennies on the dollar through a program called Payment in Lieu of Taxes. Pennies on the dollar, Mr. President, because most of our land is not ours. Most of our land cannot be developed privately. Most of that land cannot be taxed by the states and localities, which makes it harder for us to educate our children, for us to secure our streets, for us to put out fires. Fires, by the way, which become far more severe because of extensive federal land ownership, which is plainly excessive, which is plainly unfair, which kills people and results in devastating losses, not only to property, but also to the health of the environment. Because bad federal land management policy is at the root of this. You know what's interesting? People like to talk a lot about these wildfires. Well, a lot of them occur in the West. Why? Well, there's a lot of federal public land in the West. Yes, there are parts of the country where they have forests where these things don't happen, and when they do, they're put out much faster in things called private forests. Privately owned forests and forests owned by many states are much less prone to wildfires, and when they do occur, they put them out more quickly. Why? Well, because they're not hobbled under a mountain of regulations that makes it almost impossible for us to prevent them and then from putting them out quickly. This is devastating to our states. It's a burden on our states, and in our state in particular. Now, many of you come from lands, if you live east of the Rocky Mountains, you come from lands where federal public lands are almost unheard of, where they're rare, where you have private land left and right. A lot of those same states used to be mostly federal. States like Illinois used to be overwhelmingly federal. Many, if not most of the states added since the Louisiana Purchase have had language in their enabling legislation anticipating that in time, federal public land within a state's boundaries would be sold, and that in the case of my state and many other states, that a percentage of the proceeds from the sale of that land would be put into a trust fund for the benefit of the state's public education system. Those promises were honored in the Dakotas, in states like Indiana and Illinois. They were honored as we expanded westward. For some reason, when we got to the Rocky Mountains, they stopped honoring it. There are a lot of reasons for this. Some of it has to do with what we were occupied doing as a country at the time. Some of it has to do with the fact that our land was once regarded as rugged and perhaps undesirable for a time. But the understanding was still there, just as it was the understanding in the Dakotas and in states like Indiana and like Illinois. The effects are still there. We're still impoverished. Our ability to expand economically is impaired, and the health of our environment is significantly degraded as a result of this excessive, unnecessary federal land ownership. Now, make no mistake, I'm not talking here about national parks. People like to caricature those who complain about excessive federal land ownership and suggest as if we're going to put oil drilling rigs underneath Delicate Arch and other national treasures. That's not what we're talking about at all. I'm talking about garden variety federal public land, land that's sitting fallow for the most part, it's excessively restricted, and that's environmentally degraded as a result of poor federal land management policies. Why? Well, because these decisions are made by federal land managers who live and work and make decisions many hundreds and in many cases many thousands of miles from those most affected by those decisions. How then does this relate to the Antiquities Act? Well, a state like mine that has a lot of federal public land, like Alaska does, and like Wyoming does, is particularly uniquely vulnerable to predatory practices under the Antiquities Act, allowing a president of the United States under a law passed over a century ago to utilize his discretion to set aside land as a national monument. It's already federal. This is putting it into a new classification, a classification subject to even more restrictions, eligible for even less development, less human activity, less access for recreational or agricultural or religious or cultural purposes. When you put it in that category, it makes it even more difficult for those people surrounding it, those people living in and around the federal public lands in question. So Utah, like Wyoming and like Alaska, has had a whole lot of presidents declaring a whole lot of federal public land national monument land. Now, fortunately for the state of Alaska, and fortunately for the state of Wyoming, they've had congressional delegations that have, in the past, have said no more, have demanded relief, and have said they've had enough. Now, in the case of a state like mine, it's had a couple million acres, roughly, of federal public land declared monument by presidential proclamation, this is important. If it's good enough for Alaska, if it's good enough for Wyoming, why not extend the same courtesy to the state of Utah? Why, in a bill that's 680 pages long, which I received at 10 a.m. today, on what may well be the last or penultimate day of this legislative session of this Congress, why are we receiving this just now? Especially in a Senate during a term of Congress, when it was originally believed that we might be adjourning by December 6th or 7th or 13th or 14th. Here it is on December 19th. My daughter's 18th birthday, by the way. Happy birthday, Eliza. December 19th. We're just getting this bill for the first time today. What does that mean? If we had adjourned when we were originally thinking we might adjourn, would this never have happened? We've had it suggested to us by some members and some staff that had we been adjourning earlier, this would have just been released perhaps on the last day of the session. Now, I can't get into anyone else's head. I can't peer into anyone else's subjective intentions. But this makes me kind of nervous. The fact that, yes, I sit on this committee from whence this bill originated. And yes, I chair the Public Lands Subcommittee. And yet, there are a whole lot of these that the chairman and the ranking member know darn well that I oppose, that I voted against in committee. And there are other provisions that they know I've had long-standing concerns with. I wonder if maybe, just maybe, that's part of the reason they wouldn't tell me what was in it. Now, I understand it's difficult negotiating a big piece of legislation. I sympathize greatly with that. I'm not suggesting that short of receiving the entire 680-page document exactly as it has been submitted, that I would irrevocably have bound myself to voting against it. I'm not suggesting that at all. It would have been nice to have a roadmap, to have some clue as to what might have been in there. And I know from conversations I've since had with members today that they've known for weeks, if not months, that they were putting permanent LWCF reauthorization in this bill. I don't believe it was a coincidence, Mr. President, that I wasn't informed of this. I don't believe it was a coincidence, Mr. President, that even after this bill was released at 10 a.m. today, that the staff of the committee refused even to give me an outline of what was in the bill, even after they had filed it. We had to get this from a lobbyist. This is wrong. And it's wrong that the state of Utah is treated the way that it is. It's wrong that you won't give us that language. It's wrong that you won't treat us the same way that Alaska and Wyoming are treated. This, Mr. President, is wrong. We can do better. And I implore my colleagues to make this simple change. Two words, Mr. President. Add the words "or Utah" to this bill, and I will wholeheartedly support it. If not, I will continue to oppose it. Thank you.